Everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone who's joining, continues to join. During the course of the discussion, we'll try to make it as interactive and insightful as possible during the course of the discussion. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them at the bottom in the Q&A section, or if you want to share any thoughts, any comments, anything you like, anything you didn't like, you can do that in the chat section as well. So to get started, I would like to introduce myself first and then the panelists that we have today. I'm Omar. I look after partnerships here at Hysab Kytab, and I've been very closely involved with the project we're going to share with you today. On the call, I have a few panelists with me, a mix of customer experience, marketing, digital financial services, and design experts on the call. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Suleiman Shahid. We're lucky to have him with us. Dr. Suleiman Shahid is an assistant professor in computer science at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. He's also director of the Computer Human Interaction and Social Experience Lab, as well as manages the university's Usability Lab. He is also the faculty lead for the Facebook Innovation Lab. So some of the biggest innovations and some of the brightest minds in Pakistan have worked with and under Dr. Suleiman Shahid, and we're happy to have him provide his thoughts on how we can use design to actually change the uptake of digital financial services. Alongside Dr. Suleiman, we have Taimur Ali. He is the head of innovation and incubation for digital financial services at Karandas, Pakistan. He has over 12 years of experience managing key digital transformation projects in the public and private sector. Taimur is someone I have been very blessed to work with on this project very, very closely. And then two people we have from Hysab Kytab. We are a very close-knit team, and all of us are very, very excited to share the progress with you. We have Yasser Ilyas, who heads Hysab Kytab. He's a customer experience specialist, and he's very well versed in how we can navigate customer journeys to get people to the final outcome. Last but not least, our discussion today is about gender inclusive design and the uptake of digital financial services for women. Key proponent of that is joining us today is Hysab. She has been instrumental in the not only in this experiment and focusing on the design and communication aspect of this experiment, but overall, thinking of strategies on increasing the adoption of digital financial services by women. Javeria was leading marketing at Hysab Kytab recently and is now joined Daraz to lead marketing for their mobile application. Our agenda for today is we will go through a small presentation on an experiment that we ran in collaboration with Karandas, Pakistan, and then we'll have an insightful discussion on strategies that companies can adopt and other people looking to get into the space can adopt in making women a more palatable and economically viable consumer segment in the economy. So with that said, I will just share my screen and start off with a quick brief introduction. So our discussion today is on gender inclusive design and increasing the uptake of digital financial services by women in Pakistan. So we, in August of last year, Hysab Kytab partnered with Karandas, Pakistan, which is a leading think tank, and I'll allow Taimur in a short while to talk a little bit more about Karandas. But we partnered with them to run a digital experiment, and it was also funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the objective of the experiment was to determine the impact of design and experience interventions in the Hysab Kytab mobile app on the adoption of digital financial service products by women. So our hypothesis going into this experiment, as a financial services provider ourselves, we hypothesized, and keeping the problem in mind, the traditional financial services in Pakistan have traditionally been built for males as the end consumer. So we hypothesized that if we were to make women-centric changes in the UI UX of the mobile application, that would lead to an increase in the adoption of digital financial service products by women. A couple of key terms that I'd like to kind of clarify at the start, and I ask Dr. Sulaiman Shahid to explain later as well. Gender inclusive design is, to put it in layman words, designing for the critical, designing for the entire mass, right? So it's designing for both genders, and making products that are palatable for both of them from a design perspective. Digital financial service products are just financial service products like savings accounts, checking accounts, current accounts, banking products, microfinance products, and other financial services products that can be enrolled in digitally. So, given this experiment, how we conducted it, we segmented our users. We took a number of 8,000 female users for the experiment, who were active users on our mobile application, and we completely revamped the design of our application by introducing a more female-friendly version, and conjoined that with a content strategy that was more palatable to women, based on our hypothesis. We also integrated some digital financial service products, recommended those products to female users, and tried to understand what the impact was. Our focus was to do design interventions on the following themes. So we tried to play around with the app theme, with the app colors, with gender inclusive content, with icons, with typography, with illustrations. As traditional financial service applications, um, they have a specific look and feel and structure to them. So we try to take out key elements from those user experiences and iterate them onto our application. So with that said, I think with the tone said, I would like to first pass on the baton to Taimur. So Taimur can walk us through a little bit of the work Karandas Pakistan does in its entirety. But I think our audience would be very interested to know the work you guys are doing in the digital financial services space, and what are some of the key learnings that you have had so far.
So thank you very much, Umar, for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to interact with different people. I think excellent job done on the experiment, and later on in this forum, we'll definitely dive down into the findings. But to the question that you've asked, I think it's quite broad, so I'll spend some time on it, and it's a good opportunity for me to explain Karandas to different people. By now, 5 years into our creation, Karandas has been able to, create a space where we would like to take a positioning of as somebody where entities can go to for information, for a direction, and we through our grant program would support multiple digital financial service players under our digital financial services unit. So Karandas Pakistan was set up in 2015 by DFID and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have 2 to 3 major units that contribute through donors' money. So one of them is Innovation Challenge Fund that support different business ideas solely for the purpose of job creation. Then we have Credit and Investment Unit that invests in wholesale lending through banks. They invest in small and medium enterprises through their partner banks. Then this unit is response is it is also invests through equity. So we take an equity share and invest in firms so that they can grow and create more jobs. And then we've also acquired a license called non-banking financial company. We have set up Parvaz. Parvaz is the NBFI institute which lends, which is going to start lending to individual businesses and to SMEs. We're also setting up a company called Infrazamin. It's a security guarantee company which arranges capital from abroad Pakistan for the companies that have set up their businesses in Pakistan. And there comes the Digital Financial Services Unit. This particular unit is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have certain verticals within this unit. Just to make things simpler for the audience, one of the unit is directly working in establishing infrastructure for payments in Pakistan. Particularly, they are working with State Bank of Pakistan on micropayment gateway and digital banking regulations. Then we have a unit called Public Sector Engagements, where Karandas is supporting digital transformations in Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, Benazir Income Support Program. We've also supported Pakistan for Post with their digital payment strategy. Currently, we are very eager to launch an ATM card for national savings. So very soon we'll be seeing that national saving consumers will be using ATM cards to withdraw their funds. And there comes the unit that I had. It's called the private sector engagements. Through private sector engagements, we create programs like digital experiments, financial inclusion for women challenge round. You might be aware with that. We have a very renowned program called Fintech Disrupt Challenge, where we support ideas stage fintechs, and then we directly, interact with all licensed digital financial service players under our program called Pilot to Scale program. And we tend to, support entities that have currently piloted and sorted certain business issues and now looking to scale their operations. So pilot to scale program is for the entities which are looking forward to scale. Now I would like to narrow down on digital experiments. So 2 years back, our chief digital officer Rehan and I was sitting and we were creating this program for private sector engagements, and we thought, what is it to be done? What is it that is the need of the time for the market? And we also took some aid from our donor, which is also directional. And there we find this little theory called A/B testing, and we started exploring that. What is it? What is it that it explains? So हमारे लिए भी थोड़ा refresh करना था our academic side of it to see के how can we support the industry through A/B testing. So I wore the shoes when I used to work as a product manager, and I started thinking, okay, what were some of the problems that people would foresee? And on top of it, I could see that business managers has a lot of questions to answer, but at times they do not have the funds to, get to the answers to those questions at certain time. They do not get priority in technology. They do not get priority from their investment committee. They do not get priority from the approving authority. Baz dafa there is genuine budgetary issues, and baz dafa you yourself do not know how to use the data to solve for your questions. So इस तरह के problems, and then you're also running the operations. You're so lost into it that you could not figure out कि क्या करना है. And then we thought कि why not we start supporting the industry through testing their own hypothesis that they get out of their data. So then we figured out कि digital experiments launch करते हैं जिसकी theme ये होगी that we would want people to hypothesize and get to answers using Karandas funding. A couple of things that we have made easier for people is by injecting our grant is that they do not have to worry about money. The grant also brings in a lot of focus from internal and external stakeholders as well, which make things a lot simpler for people to then get to execution. And that is what digital experiment program has done. So we did a call for application on very shaky grounds, thinking that we'll get no applications, and we were really hoping that कि कुछ applications आ जाएं हमारे पास, because this is something very complicated, difficult to understand. A/B testing करना, homogeneous groups बनाना, फिर एक group के हाँ दूसरे group को compare करना, it would be difficult for people to do so. To our utmost astonishment, we received around 55, 56 applications in the first round. और उसके अंदर digital experiments में then Hisab Kitab was one of the winners. So we actually, rated applications, and there were 6 shortlisted, and Hisab Kitab experiment was one of it. We'll get into the details of this experiment while I have just given you the background of what digital experiments is. And I would leverage on people, experts sitting in this panel to, further emphasize on what this experiment was. So Karandas is eager to do more of such experiments, and the theory behind it is to support business managers in testing their hypothesis, and getting to the answers, the business questions that they have, and getting to the answers to those business questions. With this, I believe I've taken a lot of time, but Umar, I hope I've addressed the question. If there is any element left, I will be happy to address that as well.
Thank you so much, Taimur, and thank you for the introduction. Definitely, so we are, as you know, one of the participants in this grant, and we've been very blessed that we've been able to work with an organization like Karandas that not only supports, everybody talks about initiatives like financial inclusion and women empowerment and their catchwords of the 21st century, but I'm glad you guys are genuinely working towards this. So, now that we have set the tone, I would like to kind of move this discussion to Dr. Suleiman Shahid. Our experiment, and Yasser will talk a little bit more about that in the later half of the call. But our experiment was to essentially see how we can make design changes. How, as Temur mentioned, how business managers can make design changes to increase engagement, to increase adoption of services. So, Dr. Sulman, just to start, if you can, first start off by introducing the concept of human-centered design, to introduce it to our audience over here. What role does gender-inclusive design play in human-centered design, um, and what impact does an investment in human-centered design have on engagement for male or female users?
Gee, sure. Thank you very much. I think most people would know what human-centered design is. So I'll briefly say that uh, it's a it's a process of understanding human needs at its core before you start making something for them. So at the heart of it, I would say empathy and understanding the user needs and really putting yourself in their shoes is this a starting point. And It's easy to say this, but it is very difficult to actually do it. So on a paper, there are five circles, and you can easily tick those circles and then say that we have done human-centered design in a day or in a month or in a week or in a year. But to actually do justice to this requires much deeper understanding, and the team has to be equipped with the right philosophy, with the right education, with the right tools, techniques, and I would also say with the right mindset to be able to do justice to this whole process. Very often what we do actually, we exercise the process because it's written in the book, and then we do get the outcome, but the outcome is never an intended outcome because the way we have exercised the whole process doesn't really yield that valuable information. A part of me, actually works in academia, that is at LUMS, and a part of me, is also with industry, that is Designist, which is a firm based in Lahore and Karachi, where we actually practice human-centered design. And we work with the financial sector a lot. At least 4 or 5 major banks currently are also we're working with them. So you clearly see that whatever you have studied in the book, when you try to translate that into reality, there's a big departure. And if you're not equipped, with the right tools and techniques so that you can understand the local needs, by adopting your methods, not by relying on the standard methods which you have written in the book, but also really thinking about that how each method and each tool would be sort of reconsidered, keeping in mind the needs would be, it is, in my opinion, very, very important. As far as the human-centered design, when it meets with inclusive design or gender inclusive design, I think one has to really understand what inclusion means actually. So very often it is said that uh, it's about including the needs of the user who are most likely experience exclusion in many aspects. There might be oppressed groups, there might be people who might be statistical minority, who or might face exclusion in general. And if you look here in Pakistani context, I think there is no harm or shame in saying that females have been a group actually which have not been addressed in our mainstream tech revolution. And especially when you talk about, in the low socioeconomic class, they have been completely excluded in the whole design process. And I think to pay attention to them is fundamental. But I think what happens actually very often, we confuse human-centered design or design in general with more about UI design and aesthetics than thinking about understanding the behavior and attitudes. So I think human-centered design has more to offer on the understanding part and problem-solving part than thinking about should the color be pink or blue. So very often our experiments are based on this basic assumption that making a UI change would have an impact on the outcome. And I think that's a very wrong assumption in my opinion to begin with, because I think the assumption should be whether or not having an understanding of that person in a deeper fashion in ABCD way would bring more insights, and that can actually translate into a better product. So I would differentiate that clearly here. And I think that's my take on inclusion, on exclusion, and on taking a human-centered design approach in understanding the needs.
Great. Thank you, Sulman. And definitely, I think agree with you. It's often very easy to say, okay, we'll make this change in the user interface and that will yield magical results. We are a product company, a number of products. So we know that, you need to understand your customer and your user at a much deeper level, understand their needs and wants, and that translate that into the experience. With that, I'll transition into, take some question over to Javeria, who's worked extensively, on the user base of an application like Hysab Kitab, right? So it's a core financial service application, traditionally in Pakistan, geared towards men. Most financial services applications are, but Javeria, I'd love to understand, what impact. So you've worked a lot on the communication strategies, and what it takes to bring female users into the financial services space. So to get them to engage with you, to get them to do their financial activity, on an application like Hesab Kitab. So just if you can touch over what impact female centered content create on the usage that females have, and the experience that the females have on the application. So, and then your experience on in working with Hisab Kitab, what has worked for you?
Yeah, so firstly, Umar, I think the biggest issue that we had earlier was that we were making something without talking to the actual people who we were making it for, right? So that's the first thing that we overcame during this entire process. So the first thing what we did was we actually talked to the users, the existing ones and the potential ones, right? Um, so we talked to our current female users, and then we understood what problems they were facing during usage of the app, and how we could help them overcome that, or all the things that they needed, not some things that we wanted to give them, but exactly what they needed, right? And then we also talked to potential users. So this was done because we also need to know how businesses can attract new users. So retention is one thing, but attracting new users is also, part of the whole marketing process. So what we found out was that throughout our application, uh, all the visuals, all the content that was present in the app were completely male centric. Like there wasn't one female visual during the entire onboarding journey. So when you don't see yourself, you don't feel represented, right? Um, so that is one thing that we corrected during the whole content revision process. Um, and then of course there are some words that are difficult for people to understand generally, right? Even today, like I take a second to think, oh, is it debit, is it credit, right? So when making such financial apps, you get carried away and then you use such terminologies which the layman or the lay person cannot understand. So having, the whole concept of human-centric design or, gender inclusive design is to make a product that is easy to use for both the genders, right? And what we found out that not just for women, these terminologies were actually difficult for men to understand as well. So that is something we had to move away with as well. And then, yeah, the whole content strategy also applied to the way we were marketing our product, right? Because that's how you communicate, or that is one of the first touch points that the user is exposed to when interacting with your brand. Now, that also had to change massively because people are not interested in what features you have. People are interested in what benefit they'll get from using that, right? So that is something that we changed. Like we changed a lot because first we understood what kind of topics those users were interested in, and then we talk to them on those topics rather than the kind of features that we have. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
No, no, that was perfect. And we've obviously seen, and we'll be sharing the results for our participants on the experiment that we did and the impact that that the changes we made had not only on the uptake of financial services, but overall in how people were interacting with our mobile application, right? So when you talk in the context of Hysab Kitab specifically, so we are a personal financial management solution. We help people manage their finances straight from a mobile application, whether and not complex financial activity, personal finances, like where is your money going, where are you spending it, what are you budgeting for. So keeping that in mind, Yasir, as someone who has been very closely attached to this for the last 2 years, but also previously on very extensively knowledgeable on customer experience, right? I'd love for you if you can share with the audience, how how do you think an app like a PFM, right? So we're the first PFM in Pakistan. It's a very nascent technology. How does an app like a PFM, increase the uptake of digital financial services? And do you think that platforms such as ours have the opportunity to actually bring more people into the banking ecosystem, to bring more people into formal financial services, especially women?
So, Omar, thank you so much. So, you know, to begin with, if you think about this experiment, I would first of all like to thank Karandas for, choosing us as a partner for this. And I'll also pick up from, some points where from Suleiman. So, there is a policy matter, right? So, for example, when we are talking about financial inclusion or women empowerment, whether there is a policy for that, that basically is not something that the businesses pick on. So businesses want to see the ROI that is clearly there, right? So when we talk about the financial inclusion, we are talking about the lowest strata, which is like, not financially included right now. So reaching out to them and experiments like these that we have conducted with, Karandas for women empowerment, similar experiments will be conducted for financial inclusion as well. I'm hoping with Karandas as well. You need to reach the lowest and the strata of the society, and those. So financial inclusion is such a buzzword that is sometimes coined in a very different way. So when you're talking about financial inclusion, sometimes it is the digital, being digital savvy, or being able to provide a solution becomes a reason. Sometimes it is that half of your society is very focused on finding an Islamic bank, for example, right? So that's another not financially included segment. So when we are having any hypotheses, when we are making any assumptions, what we need to do is we need to validate those assumptions through some experiments. And Hysab Kitab being the Pakistan's own very first PFM, which has basically reached 160 plus countries globally, where we have user base now. So we are the catalyst. We basically have the reach in the common people. So our user base, if you think about, so our user base, we classified a user base into various. This is how we look at the users. We are looking at the gender, the age, and the user type. For the user type, we have different segments. For example, we have students. We have the professionals. We have self-employed, we have housewife, we have retired people, right? So these are all the various, segments of the society that we have reached in. So when we talk about the financial inclusion that Uma, your question was around. So, it is the fintech like us who have reached in the masses, which basically will produce the results. So as we speak, we are currently going live. Even from the bank side, if you look at the financial institutions, right? KPMG recently published a report, KPMG Pakistan, in October 2020, and this basically, if I summarize this report, this report talked about banks reaching out to their customers and trying to understand their customer. So imagine, for a bank, if it is so critical to gain the customer understanding. So, what are the means that the bank have for understanding the customer? So one is, you understand their spending behavior. You understand what kind of budgets they have. You understand what kind of saving goals they are creating, what kind of future, upcoming events, major events their life are. So if I summarize all these things, you're talking about a PFM. And in the consumer space as well as in the B2B space, Hysab Kitab is there. It's Pakistan's own product. and we're very happy to have partnered with people like Karandas, what we are able to do is that we have been able to substantiate that, through these experiments that we have done for the female, gender equality or gender inclusion, if you will, we can change the stats. So, if I look at the stats according to the World Bank, Pakistan is at the lowest, in terms of the women entrepreneurship, for example, right? So, women entrepreneurs are 1%, whereas compared to 21% of the, men entrepreneurs. So, we may go out and we may ask these institutions to change the policies, or it might come from the top, that may, you have to have gender equality or financial inclusion may come as a policy matter, right? Unless we can conduct these kind of experiments, unless we go out and show to the public that, there are business gains that you will do once you have financial inclusion done, once you have women empowerment done, right? So, those businesses will not move because policies don't change the business decisions. It is experiments like these that have an impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Yasir. And, absolutely right. 1% women entrepreneurship. But overall, so sorry, before I get into the next question, I know time is moving really fast, but I'm just going to launch a poll if the audience would like to share their thoughts on the questions that we've shared. So what we'd like to understand is, how our audience and, a representative audience in Pakistan feels about financial service offerings so far, right? So if that adoption rate is very low, if unbanked rates are over 70%, what is, the reason why people are using financial apps less? So as people answer this, I'd like to move back towards Dr. Suleiman Shahid, right? So we've understood what human-centered design is. We've understood that people are using, that people are still struggling to become a part of the financial services sphere. But from a design perspective, so, we have some entrepreneurs and startups who have joined us in this session today. We'd love if you can share to them, how can we actually implement these human-centric design principles, right? And how can we tailor them for different groups in the society? And a common question we get, especially as product people, we get is that do we need to design a completely different experience for men and women, or do we need to define an experience that varies at some point? So any advice or thoughts you can share for people who are looking to serve this segment and what they can do from a design perspective to achieve better results?
G, in the past, since I moved back to Pakistan in the past 4 years, I've been actively working with startups because I'm also, I was a part of the National Incubation Center in Lahore. So I was lucky to sort of work with about 15, 20 startups in every cohort and mentor and offer some of the design services. And I think people are very passionate because this design thinking looks beautiful, so it's amazing that it looks that whenever you sort of go through this process, something innovative would come up. And I think that's very, very important to kind of believe in this, that there's a value to the process. So I think it might be a little painful process, but I think if you don't believe in the process, I think you will never, almost never, maybe there's a good, nice accident that you nicely end up with interesting product, which still works without, following a right process. And that can happen once in a while. But typically, if the success rate of a startup is less than 1%, then a success rate of a startup which doesn't really follow a process is also 1% out of that 1%. That's why it is important to follow a process, and believe in that process, and then do justice to that process. That's the first thing. Second thing, when you talk about implementing human-centered design, there are different approaches, which in the Pakistani market has worked a lot, nicely. Sometimes people begin by having a person who's a designer or so-called designer, and then giving him or her responsibility to sort of start implementing some of the techniques and the tools which you find in human-centered design. If you can afford and there is a right partner, you can also have a design firm working with you and supporting you, in some of the things, you like to work on, and then the design firm can certainly support you. There are different types of firms out there who can help you in that. And thirdly, it has to be, you need to be very, very clear what the goals of the product are, and not to confuse with that A-centered design versus B-centered design versus C-centered design, or human-centered design versus gender-centered design versus inclusive design versus that design, So uh, there's a lot of work done in this area, whether you need to design different types of experiences for a female and male. And I think it really depends on the type of industry you're in. For example, we know there's a lot of work done which talks about shopping experience, and online shopping experiences are very different for male and female. One might follow a more transactional approach, and one might follow a more experiential approach. One might take a search route, and one might take a browsing route. So there are different ways that that the male brain versus female brain would work in exploring the online user experience. But then there are more gender neutral products, and I think the digital financial service would become more and more gender neutral, because the pain points for both gender, for male and female, are more or less same, in at least in the local context. अगर पढ़ाई लिखाई का मसला है तो दोनों के अंदर है, ठीक है, अगर एक्सपोजर का मसला है दोनों के अंदर है, ठीक है. So there might be in a very specific population of 15-20%, you might see more extreme differences between two population, but about 80%, I would not see a major difference between the two. A Cream app, would not be designed holistically differently for these two people. चाहे वो आपने bicycle पे जाना है, चाहे वो अपने motorcycle पे जाना है, चाहे वो अपने executive गाड़ी पे जाना है. So you really have to differentiate on that end. So इसलिए I am personally, while working on these ventures, I'm very careful in defining how to sort of define sex, and how to define gender, and how to sort of place that in the local socioeconomic context, and especially a diverse country like Pakistan. If I'm working in Netherlands, and if I'm working in Germany and Switzerland, I might take a different approach, on gender, and on thinking about a holistic way that how two groups would be different. But when I think about Pakistan, I think sort of using this gender lens in a very concrete and classical way, as the West might have defined for us in 1970s and 60s, which they are also trying to change dramatically now. And gender has become a big, unsolvable, complex issue in the West from a sociological perspective also. So I would not frame it as a binary thing. The difference between male and female, or even within, the female group. So I would say, go back to the basic of human-centered design. Think about human needs, and think about within that human needs, how can you come up with different personas, or different user groups, or different attitudes first, and the behaviors later, and then start designing for that. And if you see, while taking this top-down approach, or maybe bottom approach, the way you look at it, some patterns which can help you to classify a male versus female, or girl versus boy, I don't mind that. But I think purely starting with a gender lens might not always work. It may work in one scenario, other scenario, but it may not always work depending on the startup. So I'll be a little careful personally while advising startups that you should really take that specific route. Rather, I would say start on a general high-level human-centered design mindset के साथ start करें.
Awesome. And so one big part, and Javeri, I think this is something I wanted you to share with everyone. So of course, design is a big part of the overall experience that companies can provide for their customers. But if that design is not backed by how you're communicating with your customers, right? So if I'm talking about, if I'm making a lot of changes from a design perspective, but my communication has been the same as it was before, so that might not have much of an impact of attracting both genders to the application. So for this specific experiment, right, what marketing approach did you use to kind of convey the app iterations to a new female audience, right? So how did you make those females feel included, feel that this is not just another traditional financial service like I'd see an ad for car financing from a bank in which the husband is driving a car and the wife is sitting next to him, right? So how did you tailor your marketing strategy so that women felt that, there's actually a genuine focus on their interest in Hysab Kitab?
Uh, Thank you, Ma. It's a very important question. So, in terms of communication, right, what we understood was that if they're not seeing themselves representative, like if they cannot relate to the content, they won't, give a second eye to the content, right? So, in order for them to stay and actually read what we're saying or what we're talking about, we had to give some relatability in the kind of communication that we were doing. So for that, there's a very useful tool on Facebook where you can actually define what is your target audience, and then it gives you the interests or the interest categories of that certain group. So using that data, we created content around those specific categories that women of a certain age group that we were targeting at that time were interested in. So if they were interested in groceries, we had content according to that. So making grocery lists, if that's something that they would be willing to look at, if and then there was this category for working women. So we tried to work our content around that. How working women face difficulties in managing the household as well as the workplace. And of course, insights, as I said, is very important, direct insights that we got from the consumers. So, using these tools to extract data and to support the kind of content that you're producing rather than first giving the content and then testing whether it works or not. So, our approach was to research first and then to market, right? And then that worked really well in our favor because the engagement increased a lot even on our social platforms. And then, another thing that we did was we used push notifications, right, to reach out to those audiences. And we understood what kind of timings, that certain segment would be, responsive at, and then send them push notifications at that time. Or, so these kind of things. So to sum up, what I would say is that first research, then create content. So instead of creating content and then seeing the response, I would say okay, uh, uh, get, because there are a lot of ways you can get what kind of interest your target audience has, right? So why not use them? And it's available to every startup, every entrepreneurs, whether it's an individual or a business or a large organization. So with tools like Facebook, Google, it's actually become really easier for us to reach to our specific target audience and talk to them in the language that they understand. So,
Got it. Thanks, Javeria. And I'd like to ask my final question to Temur. Of course, the purpose of this digital experiment, amongst all digital experiments, uh, for us was, to really contribute to the uptake of digital financial services, right? Uh, so, Temur, what, on a final note, to take just a few minutes to convey a message to other digital financial service providers as to what are some steps that they can take, and and give them confidence that in investing in women as a target customer will reap benefits for them.
So before I get into that, I think there are some stats we can look at. While financial inclusion is challenged at the bottom of the pyramid for the whole of the population, but if we particularly look at the female segment, whether we segment it on socioeconomic groups or we segment it particularly on a pyramid, the women segments all across is challenged on financial inclusion. So we see middle of the pyramid, even for that matter, top of the pyramid, women in Pakistan have a huge gap on financial inclusion when they are compared to men. So men at the top of the pyramid might be more well versed with the financial products, might be utilizing them well for their economic empowerment, and this might be stemming from our own society But we have seen that women are challenged all across the segments. So the issue in this segment doesn't lie particularly only on the bottom of the pyramid. So यहाँ से we need to establish that there is a segment out there which need the product and a service, and we need to capture that segment. The second point that I want to put forward is that the product might be similar for both the genders, for male and women. Um, but the method of acquisition, the onboarding process, how you communicate that, and for that matter, what pricing you put in for that product might be different for the two segments. And that is what we have explored in this experiment. Some of the insights that Karan Das has put on its website from this experiment can be seen, and you will be mesmerized that the notions or the assumptions that we had, how has this experiment literally changed that. So there are some key insights that I encourage all participants to go and see. Then we have seen that this segment has grown from 22% to 27% in last 3 years on financial inclusions, which means that we have seen female accounts growing. But the irony is that the male accounts growth is a lot higher than that. And as a whole, as a part of the whole population, women financial inclusion number has gone down in Pakistan, which means that it's not growing at par with the other segments. So again, we established the point that the potential is there. There's a segment that needs to be catered. And from the findings from this experiment, we may conclude that if we, go with a human-centric approach, with a particular approach on a certain segment, we are definitely, playing for the win. Now, I would like to, put forward some of the insights that we have that will encourage the financial service providers to look at this segment, particularly to have their business lines and revenues increased. So we have seen that emphasizing particularly on a segment, whether it be a female or you segment it on age or you segment it on location, it's always very important and helpful, because then you go targeted on that segment and the acquisition cost is lower than the conventional strategy that you use. So going particular with the segment literally reduces cost for you. And going at a certain segment by reading the insights, by reading the data, as Javeria mentioned, is something that can really help you out in acquisition. We have also seen, and this is an insight from this experiment, that if you go particularly on the women segments, whether it be on your onboarding strategy, on your pricing strategy, or even for that matter on the process of your product, it doesn't hurt the male segment, or it doesn't hurt the male consumer segment that you have already acquired or you are acquiring as a standard process in your product, which means that if you focus on a certain segment, and for the matter of simplicity, you focus on female, your acquisition on the male part is not going to be distorted. So you have to go, you can go, very focused on the female segment. There are very minute and small changes that you can do to tweak yourself as a better fit for this segment. और उसके अंदर I believe Javeria might have mentioned कि typographics is something that is very lucrative for this segment. We have also seen that, and this is one thing that Karan Das has tested itself after we have seen the result in this experiment. Rather than using animations, we used images of real humans on our advertisement. And that has worked for us as well. There was a better reach and there was a better understanding of what we were trying to communicate. So, doing these small changes in your communication can really help you out. Then there's a clear-cut insight from this experiment, and I would again encourage to people to go and see that. For particularly Hysab Kitab, there is a reduction of, and Umar, please correct me if I'm wrong, there is a reduction of 5% or 7% acquisition cost. In fact, more than that, 40%,
So
if I'm
yes,
quoting it
yes,
right. Yeah. So the
yes.
number is 40%. So the acquisition cost for a customer, particularly female, on Hisab Kitab app has fallen down 40%. Imagine when you're going to quote it to your investment committees to your approving authorities. This is the incentive that you will get out of it if you design things for a particular segment. And I keep on repeating the word segment because I might not be emphasizing particularly on the gender. I want to emphasize on a higher level where which you have to define your segments, whether it be on the gender, on the location, on the age, and then you would see, if you capitalize your data, if you capitalize these insights, there are fruits to be reaped. So my recommendation to digital financial service providers is that there's a significant chunk of female out there all through the segments, right from the top to the bottom of the pyramid, or right from SECA to SECE, available to be brought on board on your products. While I resonate with the Suleiman Saab saying that product might be very similar, the acquisition strategy, the communication can be very different and can be drafted for a particular segment. And that is really going to help you out. And then we've also seen that there are about 18.4 million accounts out of the total 64.6 million adult females in Pakistan. 40 million accounts, roughly 40 million accounts का gap है इसके अंदर. If we leave out some of the needs, if we leave out people who might not need a financial product, which I highly doubt, you're still left with 20 to 25 million accounts. And we have seen that they have yielded good profits, good revenue, and lowered the cost if we acquire them with the right strategy. And that in that in and following that case, and taking the learnings from Hisab Kitab experiment, you can certainly acquire a significant chunk of female consumers, particularly female consumers, since this is the context we are saying. Again, I would repeat, segment your consumer base and then target with the right human centric approach, and you'll definitely get a good result out of your businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, Taimur. One statistic I will just add on top of that. Yes, we did see a 40% increase in the user acquisition cost. But, as mentioned at the start of the experiment, right, our key focus was to see how we can improve the uptake of digital financial services. So we saw, in our experiment, we saw that 27% increase in the conversion rate of financial service products, which means that when we had an old user interface which was geared towards males, and when we made changes on it, and we invested in those changes, we saw that conversion rate increased by 27%. And in the digital financial services space, actually in any consumer space, that's a big jump, right? The other two statistics that really stood out to me, and this is particularly interesting for soft or app providers or digital providers providing financial services on an app, is that 20% of our downloads from female users. So 20% of our downloads from female users were coming from referrals from other female users. We don't find the same kind of statistics for male users as well. So as Taimur said, when you adopt this, not only are you contributing to important causes, but you're really expanding your customer base. You're really able to attract a much larger segment of the economy. So with that, I'd like to pass on the mic to Yasser to kind of conclude this session, share a little bit about what Hisab Kitab is doing on financial inclusion, on women empowerment, and then we end the session on that note.
So thank you, Umar. So Umar, yourself and Taimur have shared some interesting stats, right? So I would like to pick up those stats and take the discussion forward. So when we are talking about reaching around 27% of the accounts in the women population in Pakistan, we have to remember that the firms in Pakistan have employed around 12% of the women, right? So which means that the 88% of the women population still at home. So for any financial inclusion or for any women empowerment solution that you can think about, you have to reach homes, right? And that is where the magic starts. So homes are connected to your lowest strata of the society, to the doodwala, to the dukandar, to all the people providing services, maybe for the mali, for the chowkidar, all of them are connected to the house, right?
Yeah.
So when you need to reach the house hold of the society, that is where your women empowerment and the financial inclusion will start happening. And there is, if banks could do that, they would have done it already. That they would have been able to open the accounts for all the females, right? As Umar shared this very important point, which is that in this experiment we found out that the referral onboarding was a lot in the females, right? So imagine a situation where you are able to onboard, some people, some households on a PFM solution. And remember, that PFM solution is the ERP solution of the household, right? So, it is not something new, it is something advanced. In other words, they were always keeping track of their expenses in the form of diaries, in the form of, Excel sheet if they were smart, a bit more literate. And there's always an innate need for the household to have a PFM solution, right? So now this PFM solution linked, but think about a bigger picture of microfinance bank connected to the PFM solution connected to the karobar, to the chai wala, to the doodh wala, to newspaper hawker, and all those people who are dealing in cash. So the only thing that can facilitate this kind of financial inclusion that we are all hoping to see, and this kind of women empowerment that we are all hoping to see, the answer to that is PFM. So I would really like to thank Karandas for choosing a startup like Hysab Kytab and giving us this opportunity to work hand in hand with Karandas. Because unless we, as I said in the beginning statement, unless we show the business impact of these initiatives, policy will never mandate this, make it happen, right? You may go ahead and make as many policies of gender equality, gender inclusion. This will not create an impact. But things like, experiments that Karandas is doing, I'm very sure, these are going to create a big impact. And I see a lot of other initiatives from Karandas as well. And we will be partnered with Karandas in all the initiatives that they're trying to do. But I think they are making a huge investment in the financial inclusion and the women empowerment of Pakistan.
Thank you, Yasir. And absolutely, we're looking forward to working with Karandas and me specifically with Taimur on some of these causes. But I think it is time. We're actually over 5 p.m. So I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today for this discussion. We weren't able to get to some of the questions, but we'll definitely answer them on email. What I'd really like to highlight is that we, in collaboration with Karandas, we have created a case study on this digital experiment, on the learnings of this experiment, on what brands can actually do, tangible things that brands can use to achieve the objectives mentioned. So we'll be reaching out via email, and on our Facebook page for more details on how you can get access to this report. So thank you guys. Thank you the panelists, Yasir, Taimur, Javeria, Dr. Suleiman. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you. Allah Hafiz, everyone.
It's a pleasure to have
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for all the participants as well.
Absolutely.
Thank
you.
you.